Welcome back to KEEPUP News Channel. Trump's deal with the devil? As Starmer vows to send British peacekeepers to Ukraine, what a truce could look like, from Zelensky's future to mineral reserves. The shape of a possible Ukraine peace deal is emerging today as Keir Starmer meets European leaders for an emergency summit and President Trump threatens to sideline Kyiv and Europe to negotiate truce directly with Vladimir Putin. Starmer today vowed to send UK troops to Ukraine as peacekeepers amid fears that European leaders and Volodymyr Zelensky are being cut out of negotiations. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Saudi Arabia and is expected to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov tomorrow. Volodymyr Zelensky is due in the Middle East state on Wednesday, but insists he knows nothing about the talks. The U.S. has sparked a frenzy by dismissing the idea that European leaders will have a seat at the table, while Zelensky has been warning that he will not accept a deal done between Washington and Moscow. Donald Trump last week made a lengthy phone call to Vladimir Putin to kick off peace talks over the Ukraine war. The details of a prospective ceasefire have not yet been clearly established, and members of Trump's cabinet have delivered mixed messages on what Washington's stance really is. But by analyzing official statements, policy papers set forth by key members of Trump's administration and various media reports, experts have begun to piece together what a peace deal hashed out by the White House and the Kremlin may look like. Volodymyr Zelensky, who has long refused to give up any of the territory annexed by Russia as part of a peace deal, said this weekend that he believes Trump has no plan to end the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian president went on to say that his nation is ready and willing to negotiate, provided the U.S. and Kyiv can come to a unified understanding of the situation. We are ready for any conversations with America and our allies, if they provide us with specific answers to specific requests from us and a common understanding of the dangerous Putin, then, with our unified understanding, we will be ready to talk with the Russians, he said. But so far, the evidence suggests that the U.S. is operating under the proviso that Ukraine will be forced to give up a considerable amount of its territory to strike a ceasefire deal. U.S. Defense Secretary Hegseth openly declared last week at a meeting in Brussels that the prospect of Ukraine regaining its pre-2014 borders as part of a peace deal was unrealistic. "We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective," Hegseth told the meeting of Ukrainian officials and more than 40 allies. "Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering," he added. Unsurprisingly, this notion was not well received by European politicians, most of whom have spent the past 36 months supporting Ukraine's war effort. The feeling was perhaps summed up best by former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt, who sarcastically remarked on Hegseth's speech, "It's certainly an innovative approach to a negotiation to make very major concessions even before they have started." But U.S. Vice President Vance has previously given very similar assessments. Weeks prior to Trump's inauguration, the then VP-elect said, "What a peace deal probably looks like is something like the current line of demarcation between Russia and Ukraine becomes like a demilitarized zone." And in a policy paper published by the conservative American think tank America First, Special Envoy Kellogg lambasted the Biden administration's approach to the Ukraine conflict and criticized those who believe Ukraine could eventually repel Russian troops from its borders with endless military aid supplied by the West. The Biden administration's approach to negotiations has been devoid of strategy and presidential leadership, the paper read. Biden and his team have consistently opposed any ceasefire or peace agreement that does not include a complete Russian withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory. The trouble with these arguments is that it is too late to avoid the possible consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Sending weapons to an endless stalemate for these reasons is expensive virtue signaling and not a constructive policy to promote peace and global stability, he concluded. It's not clear exactly how much of its territory Ukraine would be expected to renounce under a Trump-negotiated peace plan, but Russia currently controls almost a fifth of Ukrainian soil. Russia has also stated that Ukraine would have to relinquish control of a small amount of Russian territory its forces managed to seize in Kursk as part of a counteroffensive last year as part of any peace deal. Should the U.S. force Ukraine to give up some or all of the territory annexed by Putin's troops, the next challenge is to ensure that Russia does not simply take up arms again and push for more territory months or years down the line. For Ukraine, the answer to that question was, until recently, very obvious: NATO membership. The transatlantic security bloc's famous Article 5, the cornerstone of its founding treaty in 1949, stipulates that an armed attack against one or more of its members shall be considered an attack against them all. Several European leaders, including British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, have said as recently as last week that Ukraine is still on an irreversible path to joining NATO. But the White House appears to have other ideas. The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement, Hegseth told Ukrainian delegates and European defense chiefs last week. He later gave a half-hearted caveat, adding that in regard to the likelihood of Ukraine's future NATO membership, everything is on the table. But NATO operates on a unanimous voting system, meaning that the US can bar Ukraine from joining the bloc even if the other 31 member nations are in favor. Hegseth also rounded on America's European partners in NATO, declaring the White House would no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship that encourages dependency. His comments came days after Trump declared he expects NATO's European nations to boost their defense spending to 5% of GDP as part of their security commitments, more than double what most members are currently paying. This stance suggests that Ukraine's hopes of joining NATO are effectively dead in the water. Instead, it appears that Europe will take the lead in providing Ukraine with security guarantees moving forward. Britain and France are said to be discussing the possibility of deploying a peacekeeping force to Ukraine to patrol the contact line should the conflict be frozen in place as part of a ceasefire deal. In this scenario, a demilitarized zone spanning the length of the frozen front line would likely be implemented, with UK, French and other European troops working with Ukraine's armed forces to ensure its security. Sir Keir Starmer has already said the UK is ready to play a leading role in Ukraine's defence and security, including the commitment of £3 billion a year until 2030. It also means being ready and willing to contribute to security guarantees to Ukraine by putting our own troops on the ground if necessary, he confirmed in an article published by The Telegraph. I feel very deeply the responsibility that comes with potentially putting British servicemen and women in harm's way. But any role in helping to guarantee security is helping to guarantee the security of our continent, and the security of this country. A spokesperson for the German Defense Ministry also said this morning that Berlin would contribute to a framework that sees European troops head for Ukraine. If the framework is given, Germany will not shy away, the spokesperson told a press conference, responding to a question about the possibility of German ground troops in Ukraine. But not everyone is on the same page. This morning Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his nation would continue to support Ukraine with aid, but would not deploy troops. Despite some having shown willingness to put boots on the ground to uphold an eventual ceasefire in Ukraine, European leaders still insist that America is the only nation capable of guaranteeing Kiev's long-term security. The White House has seemingly acknowledged this, as Reuters reported this weekend that U.S. diplomats had sent a document asking European governments what they would need from Washington to be able to ensure that a Europe-led military force could secure Ukraine from further aggression. Trump has also been clear that the U.S. is willing to force Russia and Ukraine to uphold its commitment to a ceasefire agreement if necessary, with J.D. Vance adding last week that there are economic tools of leverage. There are of course military tools of leverage the U.S. could use against Putin. But there is no clear consensus on what protection Washington would provide if it is unwilling to deploy troops into Ukraine alongside European forces. One senior UK government source told The Times last week that America could provide air cover to a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. That's their security guarantee, a senior government source told The Times, noting that the US has not ruled out providing air cover. America was reportedly transferring Patriot air defense systems from storage in Israel to Ukraine last month. But Donald Trump has said that Ukraine must be willing to pay to America for any protections it is afforded by the White House and the U.S. military. Last week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent offered Zelensky a deal that would reportedly see Ukraine agree to hand over roughly half of its mineral wealth to the U.S. in exchange for a long-term security shield provided by Washington. It came shortly after Trump suggested that Kyiv could begin to compensate the U.S. for aid sent over the last 3 years with like $500 billion worth of critical minerals, an idea that was originally floated by Zelensky himself last year. However, it emerged yesterday that Zelensky had refused to sign the deal as it stands, telling reporters it was not in our interests today, not in the interests of sovereign Ukraine. Senior government sources told the Financial Times that the deal provided scant details of what this long-term security shield would look like. When we looked at the details, there was nothing there about future U.S. security guarantees, one official said. Ukraine has some £12 trillion worth of natural resources, including many rare earth minerals vital for the manufacture of modern technology, though many are found in the industrial heartlands in the east, currently occupied by Russia. Mining analysts and economists say Ukraine currently has no commercially operational rare earth mines. Many companies slowed or ceased operations at the start of the war, and restarting industry in a war-torn country will present a mammoth challenge for any companies willing to take the risk. This morning, Zelensky expanded on the comments, telling reporters that a U.S.-Ukraine economic treaty must see security guarantees included at least somehow, adding that his country was not just a simple supplier of raw materials. Source: dailymail.co.uk. Please like, share and subscribe. Thank you for watching.